So a few weeks back, I recorded a message that many of you maybe did not watch or or do not remember, but it was on generosity. Now, just to back up for a second, we've been talking in this series about becoming, and that the circumstances around us, the people around us, everything going on shapes us. Every day, you and I are being molded or shaped or pressed, that we're becoming somebody. Now, oftentimes, this can go on for maybe years, and we're not really reflecting on that or aware of it. But there are times when we become acutely aware of how we are being shaped. I mean, if you're a parent, I bet you've probably thought about that when it comes to this pandemic and all of the unrest we see in our country. I don't know about you, but thinking of my kids not going to school and seeing their friends for months, I wonder how that's going to change them, like forever. Like how is that going to impact them? But these events are impacting you and me as well. And so we decided to take some time to talk about who we're becoming and what might happen if we were mindful of it or if we looked at things through a different lens. Now, as I was planning this, talking about money and finances and stuff like that seemed like a no-brainer. It just happened to be the week that I preached on it or began talking about it was when the week that George Floyd was uh, murdered and the subsequent riots and protests. And so, with all of that going on, that Sunday morning, it seemed like my message fell on deaf ears. And of all things, it was my most un like the one topic I'd rather not talk about. It was generosity, but also about tithing or about giving to the church and what Jesus said about that. So we're revisiting the topic because I do think it matters how you and I view the world and how you and I live in terms of generosity. And if you did watch that message, or maybe you should go back and check it out, it's on YouTube. Um, we talked about this idea that there's kind of two different worldviews when it comes to money or when it comes to wealth or accumulation. One is a worldview of scarcity, that this world and this universe is a cold place where it's up to you to go out and get what you need and what you want and provide for your family and do your best for you. And that causes you to live in a mindset of there's not enough resources for everybody. So I've got to take care of myself. I've got to hold on to, I've got to grasp for what I want. But then we talked about that there's another mindset. It's the biblical mindset and Jesus' mindset, which was one of abundance. That this God who created out of love also created out of abundance. And that he's actually wired or created the universe to operate in just that way. That there's actually more than enough for everybody. And that if we live in a way in which we are open handed or if we are open and generous, that all of the things we fear of not having enough and or not having enough meat, all of those needs will be met. And so we happen to give one example, which was again giving or tithing. Um, Again, painful to think about. But anyway, I want to continue on that discussion. We didn't talk about it a whole lot, but I do believe this, that your family of origin totally shapes your worldview when it comes to whether the world looks like a place of abundance or a place of scarcity. Now, just to let you know a little bit about myself, I grew up in a very poor family with a single mother, um, and I remember being pretty poor. I remember wanting things that I just knew I couldn't have. In fact, I actually remember the first time I got name brand shoes. I remember I got a pair of Reeboks. Now, listen, in retrospect, they weren't even the nice Reeboks. They were kind of like the generic Reeboks. Like they were Reeboks, but like there's nothing. They were not Reebok pumps for sure. Okay, never got those. I remember when the first Air Jordans came out, and there's no way I was ever going to get those. I had a friend though who did, and after he wore them for a year or two and they were just worn out and gross or whatever, he was going to like throw them away. And I was like, I'll take them. Okay, so that's where I grew up. Okay, I grew up uh, poor with this mindset of not having and clawing to get what other people had. Now, at the same time that that's kind of was my mindset, I grew up near my grandparents who seemed to live an entirely different way. I think more than half of the food they ate an entire year was grown in their garden. They always had simple, small meals, but they were always marked by generosity. They would always take care of their children and grandchildren. They would always take care of needs as they arose. They were always quick to help when people got in a jam, even people they weren't close to. I remember them at church. They would take me, and they were always giving in church. I remember sitting next to my grandpa. He'd always give me these quarters to put in the offering plate, and I always kind of wondered, like, does God, like, I always thought of like the vending machines, like with candy, or the bubble, like the toys in the bubbles. I was like, does God like candy from the vending machine? But anyway, I grew up. Our finances improved, but growing up in a single parent home, they never improved that much, right? It's never like money was just pouring out somewhere. It's not happening. But my decisions about where I went to college and the major I chose, it always revolved around the idea that I don't have enough now, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to get more. I want money. I want cars. I want out of the cornfields of Indiana. My worldview really was one of scarcity. And so, as I became a Christian, I realized that there are other ways. There's another way to live. And there's a different way of viewing the world. And just like my grandparents, I can actually choose to trust in a God of abundance. But that takes some time to permeate through. To permeate through all the layers of my past and how my brain was literally formed in early childhood till now. Do you struggle with that mindset of scarcity versus the mindset of abundance? Have you been struggling not to lose it over the past few months? With all the job loss around you, without the threat to your well-being, the threat of running out of toilet paper? If there was ever a time that you and I would be tempted to begin grasping and clawing for more, for security, now is the time. So today I want to follow up my immensely popular sermon on becoming people of generosity with this sermon. But what I'd like to do is this. I'd like to talk about how to cultivate a lifestyle of generosity. And I'm just going to let you know from the start, you don't have to be a Christian to do what I'm going to share with you today. Now, I think that's true because I think we're going to be talking about principles that are just woven into the fabric of the universe. So it's not to say they're not Christian ideas. I'm just saying that you don't have to have personal faith in Jesus for these things to be true and to work in your life. I do think they point towards the God of creation. So first things first, I want to jump into a passage of Scripture, a teaching from Jesus. It's in Matthew chapter 6, and it starts in verse 19. And it's going to end with a verse that I bet you've heard, whether you're a Christian or not. I bet you've heard something like it. And this is what Jesus said. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust, now actually in some translations it says vermin. The Greek is kind of unclear, but where, vermin, in their time, their wealth was in grain, or it was in the fruit of their harvest. So the idea of vermin eating maybe works well here. So where moth and vermin consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor vermin consume and where thieves do not break in and steal. And this is the icing on the cake, right? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Let me take a moment to pray. God, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the time that we have together. May you speak to us through your word. May you show us how to cultivate within ourselves a lifestyle of generosity. We pray this in your name. Amen. So first thing is Jesus assumes that you and I are motivated by reward. Jesus talks about reward a lot in regards to this age to come. Again, if you need context for what that means, you should be watching the last few weeks of our messages. But basically, that there's this kingdom that has begun in some way, but will be realized in the future when Jesus returns. The new heaven, new earth. And what he's saying is like, listen, in a lot of his teachings, he talks about this reward. He said this at one time. He said, "Don't pray like that, because that's your reward. But pray like this, and you'll get reward in heaven or in the kingdom." He says, "Don't give like that. Give like this, and then you'll gain a reward." See, what Jesus is saying here is that we can store up treasure for ourselves in the age to come by giving away temporary treasure, by giving the temporary treasure away in this age. Now remember, when he's talking about the age to come, he's not talking about some cloud in heaven. He's talking about the new earth, when you and I are given resurrected and glorified bodies and we live on this new earth forever. And so Jesus is pointing to that, and he said, listen, there's a reality coming when things are going to be eternal. And the things that we see now, the treasure in this age, whether it's money or possessions or whatever, they won't last. Jesus is giving here a statement of fact. He's saying this. This is how life is, okay? Possessions and earthly assets are hard to keep safe. They can be stolen. They can rust and decay. They can be eaten by rats. They can disappear in the stock market crash. They can run dry in the middle of a pandemic. People can be stockpiling them in bunkers and forgetting that one only needs so much toilet paper in a year. Okay, that's how life is in the here and now, in this age. That's how possessions are. And Jesus is encouraging us. He's saying, that's risky. Instead of investing in that, invest in something safer with a better return. He's saying transfer what you have in this life into the age to come. Some call this the treasure principle. You can't take it with you, but you can send it ahead. So Jesus here is being our investment counselor, okay? He's saying trade it in. Trade in what's not going to last for what will last forever. Now remember, I don't know if you need an example, but I don't know if you remember a while back when the European Union was just forming. All the countries that were a part of it, right, they had their own currency, and the idea was that they were going to transition to the euro. So there was a time in France, for example, where you could go into a store, and if you were to buy something, you wanted to buy a croissant, that's how they say that. I'm really good at French. Croissant. So you would go in to buy your croissant, and you would pay in francs, right? And so that was true for a while, but then there was this phase when they were forming the European Union where you could go in and buy your croissant with either francs or with euros. And there was this window in between, and then at some point there was this cutoff. And then that was it. It was euros only. And so after that point, like today, if you were to walk into a French bank with 1 billion francs in a suitcase, which I don't know how big that suitcase would be, I would imagine it's very large. But if you did that, all you would get in return was a laugh or an odd stare. It's not worth anything now. There was a window of opportunity. And the point is that there's a window of time to trade these things in, and I think that's what Jesus is saying here, that there's a window of opportunity for you to trade in your assets, your possessions, even your very life. There's this window of time to transfer the value of those things from now into eternity. And then Jesus ends with this memorable line, another statement of reality. He's just saying, this is the way it is. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Think about that from a worldly asset standpoint. Let's say that 20, 25 years ago, you bought stock in Amazon. That would have been a really, really good investment. Blockbuster stock, not so good. But you didn't go for Blockbuster. You went for Amazon. Lucky you. So let's say you have this Amazon stock and you see something in the news about the CEO of Amazon, who must not be named. Um, I don't know why. But anyway, listen, if you see him in the news saying something or doing something, you care, don't you? Right? Because you don't want the CEO to mess up the value of your stock. Or if Amazon moves instead of like 2 day Prime, like it's 2 minute Prime, right? Delivery, like you're going to be stoked. You're going to be high five. We don't high five anymore. You're going to be doing something to celebrate because it matters to you, right? You're celebrating, you're happy because you're invested in it. And likewise, if you give money to sponsoring a kid in Nicaragua to go to school and to have health care, and you see something in the news about civil unrest or injustice in that country, you're going to care more, aren't you? That's what Jesus is saying. He's saying that your heart will follow your investment. Hearts uh, follow treasure. And Jesus wants our hearts to be weighed down by, not weighed down by the concerns of wealth and money. He wants our hearts to get caught up in His heart. And His heart is caught up with you and with all of us, with all people. So if you're sitting on your couch or wherever you're sitting and you're thinking, yeah, I want to have a heart like God does for the poor, for people all across the globe or on the cutting edge of kingdom expansion. I want to care about that kind of stuff. Here's the reality. Before you feel the feels of, oh, I love the poor, start giving. And guess what? Your heart is going to follow that. I have no doubt, this is a side note, I have no doubt this is a huge factor in American politics right now. Whether it's Bernie asking you once again to chip in a small donation, or if it's buying a red hat and a Trump flag to hang in front of your house. When you're investing in something, your heart will follow that. And that, my friends, is both an opportunity, but it's also a grave warning. Your heart will be changed by what you put your money into. And ultimately, Jesus is trying to draw us into the only place where our hearts will be satisfied, and that is with Him. And so, with all of that said, I have a question. What would it look like for us, for Anchor Church, in this year, to be captivated by the vision of leveraging all that we have in this life for His kingdom and for the age to come? What if we thought creatively about that? And not just with money. I mean, money is often needed, but it's more than that. It's really about anything we have, whether it's relationships we have or connections that we have that we could bless somebody with. I mean, it could be helping refugees or single moms to start their own business. And maybe you have that kind of business background. You're a business owner, and starting new things is your jam. I mean, how awesome would it be if if we could be that kind of blessing to somebody, to give them the information and the experience and to help them cut through the red tape to begin a new life? What do you have as far as time or relational ability or skills, or maybe it is just a big chunk of change? Here's the thing I do know. Like, generosity is an active value in our church. In the past year, we've had somebody give away a car to somebody because they knew they needed one. They just said, you need a car? Here is ours. We'll get another one. It's crazy, right? I know that some people have made it a practice in their lives to make room in their homes. They have an extra bedroom or an extra space in their home, and they just choose to make it available for traveling musicians or speakers or missionaries who are home on break or need a place as they travel. I know you're generous people, but maybe in this time that has been challenged. What would it look like for us to be captivated by this vision, to leverage what we have to invest in the kingdom? You know, what does that look like for you? I don't know. That's the question you're going to have to answer. What do you have? And what would it look like to leverage that? Jesus had another opportunity, and again, he speaks on this a lot. He had another opportunity to teach his disciples about giving, and it's in Luke chapter 21. And you can turn there if you want, or use the window here. I know there's a Bible app connected to it. But this is Luke 21:1. Now, this is Jesus. He's at the temple. He's watching with his disciples as people are giving. And he sees some examples. He sees some people that have lots of means and they're giving a lot. And then he sees something that catches his eye and he begins to use it as a moment to teach his disciples. He says this: Jesus looked up and saw rich people putting their gifts into the treasury. He also saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. He said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in all that she had to live on." What does it mean to live in the kingdom of God in a reality that's not fully seen or fully known? Well, I'm going to tell you this. It has to embrace a little bit of mystery. And the second principle I just want to tell you about first is that Jesus wants us to be investing in the age to come, that we need to put our resources now into this future age, that we need to leverage what we have now and put it in a place where it is safe and will give us a real return. But the second is this, is that you and I need to be people who practice giving out of poverty. Now, this widow, you have to again understand the cultural context. A widow was in their age, a woman was not able to really care for herself, to have a job or an occupation or an income. And they were a very agrarian culture where a lot of it was wrapped around farming or a community. So a widow would be dependent on her family or another or a male head to care for her. And if that outside help is gone, or the family was gone, then you had no means. And yet we see this widow, even though she's in that position, giving. She gives out of poverty. Even though she didn't have enough, she was going to give some away. And generosity is just as much about giving out of our poverty, where you and I are deficient or lacking, not just where we have plenty. And this is one of those moments where this is where the kingdom of God pushes us beyond the nature of this world. I mean, who would teach us to give when we really don't have? Generosity at its core is a heart posture. It's supposed to shake up our idea of what is valuable and where we place our value on things. It's an open-handed, upside-down perspective on life itself. And I think when it's actually practiced, it's so freeing that we can actually give, even in the absence of what we don't have. Poverty, like wealth, can be about a lot of other things than money. You could be poor in spirit. You could be poor in relationship, poor in happiness, poor in courage or in wisdom, poor in love even. And still, the practice of generosity is an invitation to give just the same. Because it's not so much about what we give, but how we give and why we give. So this is a game changer for me. I hope it is for you too. But Steve, how does that translate into real life? I mean, Jesus was profound. He's amazing. We all get it. Love the theory. But practically, what does that mean to give out of poverty? I have a few thoughts. One is that we can start small. we can put into practice this by starting small. First, it starts with having gratitude in your heart, okay? Having a grateful heart. When you have a grateful heart, when you experience gratitude, it's been proven that you will find yourself being able to be more generous. So if you don't do that, if you don't practice gratitude, then begin doing that. But then give small. I mentioned it, I think, a few weeks back, the train wreck of my first generosity sermon, um, about maybe starting at 1% of tithing or giving. Or it could be something like buying coffee for someone. But here's the deal, you have to start somewhere. Nothing changes if nothing changes. It's pretty catchy, actually. But really, the point is that if you want to become a generous person or have a lifestyle of generosity, something must change. So if it's buying somebody a coffee, buy somebody a coffee. But here's the point, change something. You don't have to put pressure on it to be some sort of huge gift or some overwhelming thing. Because here's the fact of the matter is you don't know how God might use a very small gift to show himself to you and to somebody else. So make it small. Start little. Start somewhere. It doesn't have to be with giving it to the church. It could be being generous with your family or with your neighbor or somebody around you. The second thing is this. I would say make it fun. Like make it exciting. Like buy someone's meal for them. Don't stare at them as they eat it. That's awkward. But buy someone stuff at the drive-thru if that's what you do. Be generous with someone with your time. Like put your phone away and be totally present with them. The third thing you can do is you can give in line with your passion. It's been scientifically proven that if to give in what you believe in, to what you want to be a part of, will radically transform your life, will improve your life. I mean, think again. This sermon isn't coming at you to make you give us, I'm not coming at you to make you give us more money. But hey, I can tell you one thing for sure. The people who give to Anchor are the ones who are the most committed to seeing God's mission fulfilled. But if we aren't invested in it, by giving financially or serving or volunteering, by engaging, well, our passion shows, right? So give in line with your passion. Or if you don't feel passionate about, like I said, your heart's going to follow where you invest in. And so if there's something you want to be passionate about, start there and start small, but start. I'll tell you two things that might be coming our way in the coming year. We're probably going to begin saving money as a church to start dreaming about a more like about a facility or a place where we can really hunker down and leverage for the kingdom and to be a blessing to the community. We're praying for an opportunity like that. We're praying also in the next year or two to begin the dreaming about what it would mean to plant another anchor church somewhere in the city of Buffalo in another neighborhood. And so that's something that's going to be coming up too. And again, I don't know where your passion lies with those things, but those are opportunities. Fourth thing is to get creative, okay? Get creative in the way that you're being generous. Think things through. There are ways, okay? I remember there are many ways when you don't have money, because trust me, I spent a lot of time not having any, that you can choose to be generous. Again, it's not all about finances. But what do you have? Get creative and find ways that you, in just the way that God made you, can be a blessing. The fifth thing you can do is evaluate and reevaluate. You can, some of us just need to come back to and really think about where we are, because life changes. We go through stages or seasons, whatever you want to call it. It's important if you want to be a person who has a lifestyle of generosity is just to evaluate, just be honest, like, hey, we've been doing this for a while. Is there something in me, or is there a way in which I can grow? Is there something more I'm being called to? And then the last one is spend time with people in need. I just got to say it again, especially in the time that we're in right now. There are people who are poor in spirit. There are people who need the gospel and they need a person to represent it to them. They need somebody who can display the love of Jesus through their life and words and actions and care. And that could be you. You could be that generous expression of love from God to them. So spend time with people in need. I know one thing for sure. I originally was planning on talking about this message about generosity as we welcome back Stephanie Forsyth. Now, if you don't know Stephanie, she felt a calling into overseas missions and began training for that, began fundraising for that. And it was actually right about this time that we were planning on doing some events to try to help her meet any financial need that she may have. So, one of the things I'd love for you to pray about, again, as she feels a calling to go overseas to places where people know nothing of Jesus, but to go, to live, to become part of their, to go to a place for her lifetime, really, and to share the gospel, to live with people and help them find Jesus. So, one of the things I would encourage you is to seek her out and to prayerfully consider supporting her in prayer and with her financial needs. But here's the deal, whether you're a Christian or not, I think everybody wants to get to the end of their days and be marked with generosity, okay? Nobody wants to go to their grave like Scrooge, where everybody's like, oh, he's so greedy. But if we want to have a lifestyle of generosity, we've got to cultivate it. We've got to cultivate that. Then the first thing I think we need to do is to evaluate, where is our heart? And Jesus says, listen, don't invest your life in stuff that's going to fade away. Invest it in what will remain forever. Invest in the age to come, in the kingdom to come. And he also tells us and teaches us that we should be giving not just out of our abundance, but out of our poverty, that we should be just giving what we have. That it's not as much about how much, but where our heart is and the reason we're doing it. So we're going to go back into our time of worship, and I encourage you to consider what it would look like for you to leverage what you have for the age to come.